good morning, everybody. We are Mountain Connect, and we're excited for another episode of Broadband Heroes.
I'm cutting you in so we can do it. In looking at this, when you look at us, we just see the back of your head. I don't know if that matters to you.
If you look at us, what?
Like in the recording, when you talk to us, we just see the back of your head in the video. I don't know if you care about that,
do you want to slide?
I don't really care because I really don't like my head, but it's fine.
People might want to see your handsome face.
I don't think so. Okay, is that better?
Yeah, that's better. That's good.
At least it's a profile.
Yeah.
They'll show the beak.
There you go.
All right, can we start again?
Yeah,
All right.
sorry.
All right, good morning. Welcome to Broadband Heroes podcast. We are excited to have some heroes with us this morning at Mountain Connect. So let's start. Before we get into it, we're going to talk about open access today and some really cool stuff. Let's do some introductions, which you guys, man, you're famous already. I mean, you've been on panels, you've been on podcasts. I don't even know if you need introductions, but let's do it anyway. So let's start with Megan.
Yes, I feel like this is one of many introductions I hear. Megan Beresford, Director of Infrastructure Programs at Learn Design Apply. We are a grant consulting and management firm.
And you didn't use any acronyms when you said that too. That's
right?
Unique in this industry because so far in the last several days it's acronym.
Acronym free over here.
Yeah, awesome. Bill.
CEO of Bill Blackford. I'm the general manager and CEO of Farmers Telephone and now FTI Wi-Fi. We're out in Southwest Colorado. We're the kind of a small ISP out there. So
Small but mighty.
yes,
Small but
absolutely.
mighty.
We'll talk about that here in a minute.
All right.
Yeah, as a hero.
As a hero.
I'm Jackie English Martin. I am product manager for Bonfire Fiber. I am supporting our open access efforts, among other things that we do at Bonfire.
And the resident AI expert, right?
Yes, I do call myself the de facto AI product manager.
That's good to have in broadband, right?
Yeah, it's been fun to investigate that sphere a little bit.
Yeah, that's slight tangent, but I was having conversations with people and they were talking about now trying to bridge not just the infrastructure piece, but move forward into what can you do with broadband and internet. And not very many people are talking about AI. They're like, well, I just want the grandma to get connected. I'm like, okay, well that's great, but then ultimately, what do you use it with? And obviously not necessarily for grandma, but how do you use that technology? So we'll get into that a little bit. All right, so the common thread I think amongst all of you is the concept of open access. So maybe before we jump into it, maybe can you define what is open access in the broadband space?
Yeah, a great question. I think if you ask someone what open access is, they're going to give you 5 different answers from 5 different people. But as far as we see it, I think open access means multiple service providers and end-to-end connection where the subscriber in the home has the ability to choose from multiple service providers and can be automatically kind of plugged in and connected or lit up, as we say in the industry, through a series of kind of automations.
You guys agree with that definition?
Yeah.
Very well.
With nothing to add.
So, okay, maybe it's like you ask 5 different people and 3 people agree with you and 2 people have a different answer.
There's different models.
Yeah, there is
There's
different models.
different models, and I think the model that Bonfire has is a successful one so far. I think it's unique. I think one of the challenges, which we can talk about later, with open access is control and trust and those kinds of things. And I think that they've figured out a way to make a bridge with providers and competition. So, if you want to kind of get into that.
Well, let's start with because obviously you're on the provider side, you're on the funding, helping providers, helping communities, you're on the infrastructure, building, operating. Let's start with the person in the home though. Why should they care about open access? Like why does it even matter to them? They just want to get Wi-Fi. Right?
Yeah.
Competition, differentiating factors, one of the frustrations that consumers have today sometimes isn't even really being connected. It's when they have a problem or issue or whatever. We've all heard it. We've seen the Saturday Night Live clip of like trying to cancel your cable service, right? And I don't know if you've seen that, but it's funny. And that's a kind of a true story. So that experience is they call an 800 number, they talk to a robot, they go through the auto attendant, maybe they're on hold for an hour, maybe 2 hours, and usually get bounced around. So I think those differentiating factors of who they're calling, the responsiveness of the provider, the personality of it, the character, how well they respond to their situation, how they listen to the consumer, pricing. There's all kinds of unique things when it comes to that provider end. But yeah, I think again it goes back though to who's building the network and how they're doing it, because the problems in the past I feel like are changed a little bit. They're unique in how they're handled.
How does it, from your perspective, Megan, how does the beginning of the process of trying to even get this funded and get it into place so there can be choice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes down to the fact that we all know is that it's expensive to build, right? Which is why
And maintain.
which is why we need the funding. I think that another important point is that oftentimes open access, when we think of it from a tribal or a municipal standpoint, is that there's ownership of the infrastructure. And so it's also, once it's built and you get through everything, a component of either the tribe or the municipality able to make a profit from owning that, which, it's great. We love making money. But, it takes money to make money, as they say.
Yeah.
I think that's a saying. Is
That's
that a
a
saying?
saying.
Okay. It takes money to make money. Takes money to spend money too. But I think
It
that's,
takes somebody to spend the money.
it takes somebody to spend, and it takes somebody to help get the money to spend the money.
There you go.
So that's where I come in. No, I mean, if there isn't funding, right, because it is a different model, a different financial setup than a typical, I'm building this and I'm serving.
Yeah.
And so I think often open access does take a different kind of funding stream, whether it's grants or private, because it is a different revenue model, right? So,
Do you encourage, from your perspective, because again, you're trying to make it rain, not figuratively, but do you try to encourage the communities or a provider, like, to, hey, this is a good model to go to, or do you caution against, like, hey, these are the things to think about?
I would say we tend to follow what our clients are looking to do. One thing that we do see with open access is that it does come back to that consumer point, right? So it does come back to the people in the house, right? And understanding their needs. And I think sometimes you can see more of that community concern with folks looking to do open access. Not that it's not there elsewhere, right? Like for your network that's not open access. I mean, you're one of the most generous people I know. And I know you guys did a lot for your community during COVID. And so I think there is that element of caring, but I've found that more often than not, the clients we have that are looking at open access have a true concern for the consumer and for the community. So
open access, purpose driven.
Yeah. And again, to our clients that are not that, we also appreciate that you care. So I don't want to exactly disclaimer. But yeah, I think there is that element to open access.
The good thing about broadband models are there are multiple ones, right? It's not one size fits all. So Jackie, from your perspective, what should somebody really think about in the modeling, and when you're thinking about building and operating? Because it's not just, I think again, so much money and time is spent on just building the physical infrastructure, but operating a network is pretty damn important too.
Yeah, I mean, first couple things that come to mind is, first off, just understanding the market that you're in from a community perspective, from a demographics perspective. So like we had talked about, if you have quote unquote more grandmas in your community, like the way that you are going to be able to connect those folks, the way that we're going to work through simple things, quote unquote, like scheduling installations and working through trouble tickets. That's going to change depending on the type of market demographics that you have. The size of the market overall is also, really going to impact the approach from an operations perspective. As far as Bonfire is concerned, we want to be very sensitive of having full service providers. But depending on the size of the market, we want the service providers to be able to be equally competitive in the markets that we're in. And what that means for us is having a fair number of service providers that can access, any number of subscribers based off of the size of the market.
It's fair. Bill, what would you, from as a provider in this space, and as Megan said, you've split the baby, so to speak, right? You have some parts of your business that is open access and some that's not.
Yeah.
And obviously having both works. Is there anything though that, like, now that you're into this model, anything that you've learned that you'd want to share with other providers that think, oh, wow, this could be good?
Yeah, we're on 2 open access networks, and they're 2 completely different open access models. To start with, as a small provider, it costs a lot of money to build a network, right? And one of the unique factors of an open access market is it allows a small provider to play in a similar space as a large provider. So, in the past, unless you had very deep pockets, you might not be able to provide service in a particular area because you didn't have the capital backing to do it, even though you might have been that provider that was community oriented and you might be maybe a better fit for that community, you couldn't play. So open access allows a small provider like us to be able to go in and compete as like a big provider. So they get the consumer gets that small town, authentic, local service provider, but really with the backing of very large capital investment. And then, was there another part of the question?
Yeah, so I guess on that, so I've had some conversations with some government officials this week about the accountability that comes along with funding the model and the provider. And some of the conversation was, well, how much is too much to push onto someone like you? Like how much requirements of reporting back around statistics, performance of the network. And now it's even a little more complicated because you own part of that. The people operating the network own some of that. Do you think it is fair from a government perspective and a community perspective to have that transparency, to see some of the metrics? Should a Bonfire, should an FTI report out some of that metrics back to not necessarily the community, but to government officials?
To a certain extent. I think the difficulty, though, again, as a small company, is you have limited resources.
Right. That's what they said.
Right. And so one of the challenges we have today, right, we do get some funding, and it's a massive challenge every quarter, every month, every year to be able to accomplish what the government asks you to do. And I think there should be transparency. If a citizen is putting a tax dollar forward, they need to get transparency out of what their investment is. I think that's the unfortunate part in our country sometimes is, you pay all these taxes and you have no idea, right, where that money goes. It's great if you see a new road, but oftentimes you're driving across a pothole, right? Yeah. So I think that's where, and that's very transparent. You're feeling it, or your drivetrain or your axle feels it. So, it's the same kind of thing. I think there should be transparency, but they also have to be aware that there's only so much that a small provider can do. Yeah. I think what Bonfire has done, though, is because they have put a really good, software system in place, created kind of that a really good transparent middle person software. There's a lot of transparency that can just come out of that from a data perspective. In another open access model, there isn't any of that. And so it's very difficult to be able to try to tell that story or be transparent or communicate that message because you don't really have the software and those data points to be able to kind of share that from a reporting standpoint. So it kind of just depends on, and I think, again, the modeling is important, but also trust, right? Because you brought that up, which is you have to have, one of the problems that providers have always had with open access is I want to control so that I can trust that whatever's out there is going to be the right type of network. It's going to function correctly because our name, branding, and recognition is on the line when it comes to providing that service. So you do have to have that symbiotic relationship with a provider. Yeah. And I think that's the exciting part with our partnership with Bonfire is that, I know what they're doing, what they stand for, how they build networks. And so there's a little bit more trust factor than maybe kind of walking into an open access where you have no relationship, you don't really know what's going on. So I think it does require providers to have conversations with those kind of operators or network builders and kind of sit in a room and start building that rapport and determining whether it's a good fit for them. Because it may not. That one might be a good fit, but this one might not be in a particular situation.
Do you think it's, again, from a communication in this industry has to go both ways, right? From funding down to feedback back. Yeah, Megan, you're kind of in the middle. I mean, obviously you deal with both parties. Should there be more communication, or is there a communication and education about open access that needs to go back up to broadband directors, to even at the federal level? Like, should there be more advocacy for this type of a model that just isn't there today? That's to anybody.
I don't know if it's necessarily advocacy, but I think clarity and education. So thinking of a lot of grants that oftentimes require open access. And because we do, as we've talked about, have so many different permutations of open access, sometimes it's not quite clear what you have to do. And then when you also think about the people who are putting together the rules of the grant, right, the legislature, every grant I see, I'm like, no one is teaching these senators and these representatives about the internet. Yeah. Like the rules and the things they put in place.
Realistic. Some of these people, I'm not convinced they're even on the internet.
True. I mean, there's.
I can say that. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying. These guys.
There's a degree of education that I think can go literally from all the way to Congress, all the way down to the customer. Right. So if the customer is curious what information is being taken from them, which, a lot of skeptical people want to know.
Yeah.
And then going to the provider side, and the provider trying to interpret all of these guidelines of what they have to do and what does that look like and what does it
fair
mean.
For a small provider to try to figure it all out.
Yeah. Exactly. Like I think there can be a lot of clarity that can be provided amongst all parties that sometimes isn't there. And I think that can cause confusion, frustration, and certainly in the grants world, then sometimes people just not even going after the funding because it,
But whose responsibility is that?
For the education?
Yeah. I mean, we have representatives from all different kinds. Like who should?
Everyone. I mean, that's the reason why I go to DC every year, because to Megan's point, you have to re-educate everyone. There's a constant, revolving door of people in those kind of spheres. So you have to and it's a changing environment. So you have to go back and back and back, re-communicate, re-educate. And then there's a lot of changes in the midst of that you need to communicate. But I also, I think education is important, but I also think getting all the right people at the table together is important, because I've seen a lot of, municipalities or other folks say, oh, we want that. But how they want it is different than how it can actually be delivered. And sometimes those end up in failures, right? So I've seen open access fail, but I've also seen it be very successful. And you kind of have to look at, well, why? It's not that the intents were all incorrect. Right. It's just the execution or not having the right people around the table, transparency. And I've sat in the room with many, municipalities and said, I think in your case, this is a bad idea. You already have 5, 6, 7 providers.
Yeah.
You're going to build a field of dreams when you already have 5 fields. And it's like, if you have 5 baseball fields and you want to build a 6th one to bring in a tournament, and it's like, well, you already have the 5, so you're competing with all of that. So I think it's a kind of a Cinderella shoe thing where you have to make sure it's a good fit, the communication, education, re-education, and hopefully, we kind of.
I think I just came up with a huge marketing campaign about Cinderella story for open access.
Yeah.
There you go. And
the
branding. Inside joke.
Yes. The branding, yes. Definitely the branding. Well, I guess from all of that, so I mean, obviously we need more advocacy or education. Sorry, not necessarily advocacy.
I mean, both.
Yeah. But it might, I think your statement's a little concerning when you think about people that just give up because it's too hard. Like, they don't understand that, hey, there are people out there that could help. There's people that are willing to try it, but it's just too complicated. So what's the suggestion for many of you guys? Like, what should somebody do? Like, hey, this is complicated. I really think my community could do this, but it's just too hard. I don't have the resources. I don't have the time.
Yeah, I guess I know for, the way that we operate and other open access operators that I've spoken to, like the first thing is if you're interested as a municipality, tribal entity, whatever it is, if you're interested in open access, like the first place to start is almost always a feasibility study. Like you're just going to do a lot of deep dive research into, like you had said, like what is the competition in the marketplace right now? Does it make sense? Is there enough pent up demand for alternate providers for, if we're coming in to build a fiber network, is there existing fiber or not? And that's going to change the way that, we can forecast whether or not it's going to be successful. I think that time.
So be fact-based.
Yes, absolutely. And taking the time to like do the research is really critical instead of sometimes pushing things through because they're a fad, if you will. And I don't think that open access is, but it's emerging in popularity in certain spheres where I think sometimes a council person or whatever will hear, oh, that's cool. I'm going to bring choice to my constituency. And that is really important, and they complain about the internet and all of that. But you have to do it the right way. You can't just be like, okay, hey, we're going to start shoving 2 providers into this market and, we're going to start trying to build fiber or wire or whatever it is. And you need to, yes, be fact-based and take the time to get those facts correct prior to, starting a construction build and all of the complications that come along with that.
The old saying in marketing is good marketing can make a bad product fail fast. Right. So good marketing can make a bad model fail fast if you don't, to your point, I mean, if it sounds great and somebody isn't educated about it, they need to have all the facts. They need to have what are their opportunities, what are the funding sources, what are the models, what are the providers, who can operate it, all that. So, well, guys, I think thank you for your time. I think this model and the opportunity, especially with BEAD and everything that's going on, huge opportunity. But I think the constant theme I've heard this week and just in general is the people out there need to talk to people like you. They need to educate themselves, talk to people that are actually doing it, give the pros and cons. I mean, nothing's perfect. What are the funding opportunities? And hey, from an operating perspective, what are the gotchas? Like, what can you prevent? I mean, I think you can learn from everything. So any final comments you just want to share with people like, hey, if you want to reach out or you want to talk about it, want to share with the people?
I want to go last.
Okay.
You always do this.
I'll go first. I think being open-minded in this community. In my career, I saw a lot of we go this way and that's the only way. And here's why, and they have kind of a very strong argument. But the exciting thing about the broadband industry is there is no limits. And when you don't limit yourself, you open yourself up to opportunity or technology, whatever it is. Open access doesn't matter.
Quantum particles.
Quantum particle entanglement is what we talked about last time. Quantum computing and where that's going. That's exciting, but it is a ways down the road. But don't be closed-minded, because when it comes to open access, it may or may not work in your area. I was going to say that's why I rely on folks like Megan and Jackie and others in the industry to tell that story, or hire them to do certain things. Because again, as a small provider, I can't. I can only tell one part of the equation. Sometimes it looks biased too, right? Yeah. So I think it's important if you're a tribal entity, if you're a municipality, is to reach out and again try to find those really strong partnerships that can come in, do those studies, market analysis, figure out really what's going on and what you can do. But then don't limit yourself on technology. Look at all options. I think we've heard a lot of that at Mountain Connect this week, which was exciting to hear, because I think last year it was kind of like we only should go this way. Yeah. And I live in an area where I would love to do all fiber. But we can't always do that. Right. And it's not economically feasible. And so we've launched our Wi-Fi service. And so we're providing really amazing speeds at long distances in rural areas. And I think those are the kinds of things that, has anybody thought about doing that as an open access?
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. And no one's talking about those kinds of things. And so I think that, again, be open-minded. Reach out to people in the industry, and I love what you said. Talk, communicate. It's the whole point of Mountain Connect, right? That was the whole purpose behind it, is to get industry experts together.
Sage advice. Jackie?
I guess I'm going in the middle. So I would echo Bill's sentiment on partnerships, absolutely. And I might even harken back to what I had kind of previously talked about, which is like there are different flavors of open access. So if you are interested, I really think it is so important to just do the research first and get to know what your community needs are, and then be able to adjust from there. And I'm saying that because I think there's a lot of importance in, as you had mentioned, Megan, if you're a municipality or a tribal government, being able to determine whether or not you want to own the infrastructure is critical to how you continue to make the decisions the rest of the way down the road. And knowing that you have the option to own that infrastructure and can still have open access on top of that, right? So like we can split the municipality or tribal entity owns the infrastructure, there's someone operating, and then there's third layer of multiple service providers providing to the community. You can do all of those things, and then as an owner you can help kind of dictate the percent of coverage that you want. If you want 100% coverage, you can make that happen. Now we have to figure out the numbers behind that, right? And to your point, like there might be some times where that can't be possible in a fiber build, but as an owner, you have a little bit more control. So yeah, I guess I would just harken back to say partnership is critically important, and figuring out the type of open access model that you want, doing that research on the various permutations, and then moving from there.
Right.
I feel like I don't use the word hearken enough.
I really like that word.
I'm now going to incorporate that into my daily vocabulary. I think my thing would go back to just the education amongst everyone about this, the advocacy. I think there are some, everyone seems to come in with an opinion about open access, whether they're for it or whether they're against it. There could even be people who see the title of this podcast and they're like, I'm not going to watch because I hate open access, right? So I
never
think
change title.
I know. Something about AI. I'm pretty sure you said we were going to talk about AI, and we have not. No, I think that education amongst all parties is really important, on what it means, what it looks like, whether it's right for you or not. And as always, getting Congress to understand these concepts as well, I think is critically important. I feel like every time I'm down in your territory, you're in DC, and I always miss you, but I'm glad you're in DC doing this because, someone needs to, and there's many persons, but I'm glad that Bill is there because Bill's the best.
Bill is
So
We're gonna end on that note. Bill is the best.
Bill is the best.
I actually don't know if we can.
There's
end
really
on that note.
nothing.
You can totally end on that note.
Nothing more needs to be said.
Yeah.
I feel like you can cut the entire
I think
podcast to just
cheers to
Bill's
Bill.
the best.
I mean,
Cheers
let's
to
just
Bill.
cheers to Bill.
Cheers to
Yay.
Megan.
To all you heroes.
There we go.
Broadband superheroes.
Broadband superheroes.
Superheroes.
But we can have a little bonus footage and say, all right, since you do like AI,
Yeah,
like
let's
AI,
talk about
let's
AI.
talk about AI. We can
Here we
take a few
go.
more minutes here.
Here we
So
go.
What's
Yes.
all right, what is the craziest thing you think is going to happen in AI in the next 90 days?
I like that time frame.
I do too.
And because I don't know if you saw the news, there's some changes in the AI industry yesterday.
I didn't read it.
I didn't read it.
What did it say?
Tell us.
There's one of the founders is now moved over to a different company, and then one of the other people at OpenAI is now taking a sabbatical to recharge, and so there's some shifts in the in the giants of the world over there. So 90 days is a long time actually in the world of AI. So,
But it is an election year, and we've seen
where would we be without talking about
unprecedented, historical, right? So who's to say that?
By the way, we are not real. We are actually AI augmentation.
That's a tough one, Nick. 90 days.
Yeah.
I think we see agency to AI has been the pilot, right? It's been the tool that supports us, and as it becomes that kind of agency, it starts to be autonomous. I think that's the scary part that everybody's afraid of. I think there's a lot of discussions around regulation, but actually what it's being used for, like I was just talking about the other day, I downloaded an app because I wanted to create some videos for maybe some marketing ideas, and you just type in a sentence, right? Like, I want this to look green and I want it to be a tall building, whatever you want. And it just, in 3 minutes, it creates an entire video for you. That's powerful. But when it comes to, I think, things that we do in our industry to help us, make good decisions, I think, I was talking to a partner around cybersecurity. And, I always get
CrowdStrike, anybody? Delta Airlines?
Right. And, it's a scary thing because, the bad AI is going to be good, but hopefully the good AI is better. And it is a war. We're also, from not to get political, but there is a cyber war happening in the world. And so it's really important that we protect our networks, our consumers, our customers. There's benefits both ways, but I couldn't tell you 90 days. I don't know.
I think do you think, as you joked about the politics, I think there's going to be a ramp up the next 90 days of the deep fakes. I think there's going to be so much content out there. And it actually made me think about your point about education and advocacy. On the good, that's the bad side, right? That's the negative side. The plus side, like I've looked at AI applications that can literally clone myself, and I can then get myself out and teach and talk and do things. You could literally expand out your ability to reach more people using AI. That's the good thing. That's on the good side. So I do think that piece is going to be a huge element in the next 90 days of just content distribution. The question is, will the content be good or bad?
Mm-hmm. I will say, and this is, shameless plug for Merit, whom we're working with, and a brilliant woman there, Purette, who's working on an AI language model to help with digital equity matters. And so I think there are a lot of beautiful ways that AI can be used to, kind of like you were saying in the beginning, how does grandma get connected to the internet, and how does she create an email, and how does she get telehealth? And there's wonderful ways AI is being used to help with those matters and to help with digital equity. And so I think within the next 90 days, and I think maybe a little bit of the sad part is that those exciting, like really happy stories of it tend to get pushed down low and we don't hear about it.
They're not as entertaining.
They're not as entertaining as some other ones, but I think there are a lot of kind of beautiful, brilliant things being done with it for public good. And so hopefully within the next 90 days, we start to hear more about that.
It's an election year.
More positive news, maybe?
Yeah. No.
Hey, I'll tell you what, this is my promise to you. If you have good stories you want to share, you always have this forum to come.
There you go.
You have this. Yeah. We will talk about heroes all day, every day, live, not live. So, all right, what do you think? 90 days.
I'm gonna go on the actually tech side of it. I think that there's going to be continued efforts to make the tokenization and integration uses of, kind of these models cheaper. So I think it's incredible, what you can do if you're integrating with, OpenAI or any of these large language models, to then do whatever you want to do, automation on top of that, and the continued efforts to make that cheaper and cheaper. So, I think a token now is 0.0001 cent or something like that. So I can do so many things for $10, and I think that's just going to continue to get cheaper.
And on that point, I think what we're going to see maybe a little further than 90 days is you're going to see a lot of companies pop up with, 2 people. Because
100%.
With AI, you can do things that you could never do before. It might have taken an entire company of people to accomplish. And I think there's going to be a lot of these, little kind of 2-3 people startup companies that are going to be doing some pretty amazing things. So.
I guess the good and the bad of that. So I don't know if you saw Intel laid off 15,000 people. Well, because of AI, right? Because they're using the technology to be able to do all these things that. And I think, to me, AI is replacing tasks for people. I think if you look at it from a task-based perspective, that doesn't mean you lose a job, but it's taking away things, so jobs have to change.
Yes.
It's not like yes, some people are going to really struggle to get further? Sure, but I think there's good and bad on both sides.
I think it can be there for efficiency, right?
Yeah.
And so you can still have a person and just do what they do more efficiency, or efficiently and then a higher output of whatever they might be doing. I'm going to pause. Is it language learning model? Large learning?
Yeah,
large
LLMs,
language?
yeah.
Okay. So this
Large
clearly
language.
shows why I am like not in this, because everything Jackie said, I was like, I'm so glad she's doing this because I understand nothing. Hopefully in the next 90 days, little lay people like me can have a better understanding of AI,
But I think
Anyway.
like what you had said is so important for understanding AI in the next 90 days or beyond. Two things really stand out to me is first, like we need to be making sure that the technological advances that are happening, that are accessible, that someone like me can really nerd out on, is also equally accessible to people who are consistently overlooked throughout, kind of history. So, like you had talked about, like digital equity. What does AI look like in digital equity and digital inclusion efforts? Because in my opinion, it needs to be included, right? It needs to be part of some of that curriculum. And does grandma need to know how to use ChatGPT? We can have that discussion. But does a 15-year-old marginalized student who is on low income and things like, or happens to be low income, they need to be using those tools, learning those tools, and then being able to advance throughout society with that kind of technological toolkit, in their pocket, so to speak. So I just think it's really important that we don't leave people behind as we're, opening up this brand new space of amazing efficiency that can come from, someone who is in like kind of a quote unquote white collar job like me, right? Like, let's make sure that we're bringing everyone along with this advancement. And then I think with that look on what the technology can do, it no longer becomes something where it's like, oh, well, this is going to replace me. This is going to take my job. It's really about how can this do things that we don't want to do as humans, right? Like, I think there's this really funny but accurate quote of like, I don't want my AI to take my job and do all, make my art and make my music and make my videos and my deepfakes and everything else, while I still have to do the dishes and the laundry and all of this stuff. I want AI to do dishes and laundry and all the stuff that I don't want to do, while I now have time and can be freed up to do things like investigating watercolors as a hobby of mine, which is not, I'm not artistically inclined, but maybe I could be, and I just, haven't tried that out, or whatever it is. So I think that's really my, call it naive or optimistic take on the technology, is if you do try to make sure that you're using it in a way that it's lifting everyone up, and you're using it in a way that's making you more efficient to free up your time to do things what humans are supposed to be doing, which is creativity, collaboration, communication, all of that.
But do you, from just a question, right? And not to get dark, I'm a very optimistic person. But one of the things, I was having a conversation the other day with somebody about this, and it was, I've got some older kids, and the generation that grew up before the internet or before connectivity, and then, kind of before AI, I guess, and now we have kind of a new generation that will kind of live through that. And the ones that come after, because before the internet, you had to learn a certain capability to troubleshoot problem solve.
Mm.
And then when the internet came along, it was this amazing tools like, oh, I can just Google it.
Yeah.
Or I can watch that YouTube video. But you still were applying the same logic to troubleshooting, problem solving, but now you have this amazing tool.
Mm.
One of the concerns that I see right now is a younger generation who didn't have that development.
Mm.
And then they have the information available and they don't work as hard or don't have those developed skills. We saw that during COVID. A lot of kids just used the internet to, I'll just say it, cheat.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm at home, no one's watching, and I can just Google it. My concern with AI a little bit is kind of even further, which is, you're right. Hopefully people use it just for those tasks they don't want to do. My concern is more about the development side of our younger generation, and how do we make sure that our kids and our younger folks are being developed in a way that they can intuitively, learn to, problem solve and use that kind of logic to troubleshoot in life without having to rely so much on, the internet, AI, because AI can now do all those things for you. Well, then I don't have to think about it. It's like Idiocracy,
Yeah,
movie,
that's
right?
hilarious.
Or Wall-E. You
Mhm.
guys like the movie
Yeah.
Wall-E, and it's kind of this kind of prophetic view of, well, if I don't have to learn it, then I have this kind of stumped growth of development as a human. So that's kind of my concern a little bit. And I think we need to make sure that we get ahead of that in some way to make sure that our kids and our young folks are developing in the right way before we just say, hey, here's all the tools in the world and you don't have to do anything.
I think it's opening up a different kind of development that we didn't have.
True.
That,
Absolutely.
And so I think
Yeah.
thinking about that interaction with technology and with the internet, right? If that is where we're, that's going to be such a huge part and develop in the future, and much more interaction with that. And the younger generation now is learning that. Like my little nephew goes to computer classes and they do it without a mouse. And like,
Oh, wow.
I never learn things like that, but it's going to be such a part, already is such a part, right? So they're learning different things and interacting with the world in a different way because it is a different world.
Yes.
And so I think there's, I absolutely hear what you're saying, and some of the, like, how do you make a life choice, or like very high up, like how do we be humans type thing. But as strange as it's to say, like, humans are going to be different. Like, humans are already different from one generation to another. And
Although, and I think you guys talked about this yesterday a little bit at the panel. I mean, we need a younger generation of people, though, of leaders, also raising the boat, so to speak, because the people that are in this industry in general typically are older. So in order to understand a different mindset, even younger than us, like that next generation and the generation, how do we, that perspective is needed critically to be able to solve those problems.
And things like, I don't know how to be a leader on TikTok, but people on TikTok have like such huge, like it's such a huge platform.
I've seen you out there now.
I know my dance moves. No, I think, right? Like I don't know how to be a leader on TikTok, but that's the way, your people are reaching a lot of people. And so again, I think it's this evolution of it's going to look different for every generation of how you're a leader.
You gave me an idea though about using AI. So a lot of the conversations have been about grandma, right? So grandma, like, what if you could literally have an avatar of somebody that could maybe speak a different language, could look more like somebody in the community, could have the mannerisms. Like, you could actually have a assistant or somebody to really help them and talk to them versus trying to read instructions or watch a YouTube video. I mean, you really could advance and help that next generation or the older generation in a much more personal way, right? Which would be great, right? Like, instead of like, hey, let me just ask you questions literally versus trying, right now you can never talk to anybody live, right? It's chat or it's this or that. So lots of ideas right now.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think generally it's a combination of both. What you were describing I personally do find, and I don't know, maybe this is like quote unquote too old, but grew up.
If you were too old,
I was gonna say,
wow,
I'm leaning on you.
Yikes.
So, but like I did grow up with the internet, right? I didn't grow up with AI, so I might be too old to represent what it's like to grow up with AI. But I use AI to teach myself new things instead of be like, oh, I don't really need to. Coding is a great example where years ago, I just decided I didn't want to code very heavily because I don't like how you have to troubleshoot and something all of a sudden is buggy and you're like trying. So anyway, I find it very annoying. But now it's not as annoying because I can automate the portions of that I don't want to do or didn't really, I got frustrated trying to learn. And there's
That's my point.
So
no, that's my point, because again, if you had to work on a car, right, you should break it down to little things, right? If I had the ability to use AI every time my car broke down, I would be like, this is amazing. But then I would never learn to work on my car. Therefore, I would have to spend a lot of money to have somebody fix it, or I couldn't be self-reliant. I live out in the middle of nowhere. So that's my concern, is that as we go forward, how do we make sure that we teach you how to deal with those frustrations and actually learn it so that you can fix it, that you develop in that way, so that you don't just rely on AI or the internet to solve your problems? Because what happens if we get hit with a solar flare that goes through our magnetosphere and all of a sudden our electrical grid is gone? Could anybody here today, including me, know how to like make a phone or create a network? Or it's like, no, I don't think so.
He's a little dark today.
I didn't mean to be dark. I have kids that I have these conversations with because they're like in the.
It's pragmatic.
Yeah, and I'm concerned because I have a grandson who's 3, and I think about him and I think about how he's going to grow up in the AI generation.
Right.
And the AI generation, is it going to be more lazy than my kids?
Probably, quote unquote. But like, why does it matter?
It matters because at some point things break down, right? It goes back to the car scenario. Like my kids would be like, "Oh, Dad, my car broke down." It's like, okay, well, did you troubleshoot? Did you go through these steps?
Mm-hmm.
Did you? Oh, actually, I figured out it's just the battery or whatever. Okay, I didn't have to spend $300. I didn't have to lose time at work or whatever. There's all kinds of things about life that, and I get it that we're so connected that it's hard to look. That's what I'm kind of talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to the jobs things as well, because I do have concerns about jobs. I mean, I was at a conference a while back and they were talking about how a company got developed that created a fast food restaurant. And you pull up and you talk to a 18-year-old kid and they crack jokes with you and they order your food and you get up there and you realize that it's just an avatar.
Yep.
Right? So that's amazing. What a great business model, but you also took away the job of the 18-year-old. So now the 18-year-old has to go find a different job, right?
But what if we're teaching the 18-year-old skills to
How to
make
build the avatar?
avatar?
I don't disagree with that, but it's what we saw in telecommunications, and I'm going to go way back in time. When we went from the switchboard, right? We had hundreds of thousands of employees that were doing switchboards. Hi, how can I help you? Right. And they would transfer the calls. Then we went to mechanical, and then eventually we digital, and now we're in the IP space when it comes to switching. Now we're basically to the point where it's just software, and all those people had to go find other jobs. And they did to some extent. But I always have this thing in the back of my mind, like, is the world really better? I don't know. And so I always question, even though it's amazing and I love it, right? I love being able to pull up like the app that I'm using to build videos, or open AI to, I'm not the best, most eloquent writer, right? So I can come up with the idea, I can write okay, but then I need a little help to clean it up a little bit. I love that.
Yeah.
It's amazing. But then I think about a generation who didn't have to think that way.
Mm-hmm.
That they just rely on something, and then next thing you know, they're like in a lazy boy drinking some kind of strange drink with like a camera on their head. And
So like Ready Player One, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. So I don't mean to be dark, but I do have concerns. But I do think it comes down to, how do we help our kids critically think? How do we make sure that they're thinking of things like this, so that when they're walking through those things in life, they don't just immediately go, well, I'll just let the internet, I'll let the AI handle that. I love your idea. If you can create a way to personalize AI, and it's AI, because that's the other concern
For sure.
line, right?
Yeah.
It's like you make a phone call and you're like talking to somebody and you realize that it's not a human. I think I'd be a little frustrated. So I think we have to come up with a way to put some kind of watermark or distinction that says, hey, you're speaking with an AI representative.
It's gotten good though. I mean, there's a full podcast I listen to that is entirely AI. The hosts, the people, like everything is AI, and you can't. A couple times you can hear it, but like, well, it's pretty good.
We are AI.
We are not really real. All right, guys. Well, we're gonna have to wrap, but I clearly think we need to have another discussion just on AI.
I thought
Yeah.
honestly we might.
I feel like maybe you just like cut the whole first part of the podcast and we just have an AI.
No, this was great. So I appreciate it. We'll definitely have another one, just be virtual, unless you guys all want to come back.
I'll send my AI representative.
Yeah.
It's in my avatar.
Well, cheers. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Woo.
Cheers.